Do you have any prior experience working in a pawn shop? No, I haven't, but I have a lot of experience elsewhere. I was employed by a few CPA firms. All right, you're a certified public accountant then. Indeed, heartbreak marked the end of Richard Harrison's life. However, the true tragedy occurred years before he passed away. Millions of people knew him as the witty elderly man from Pawn Stars, but his life's problems never made it onto the television. He paid a price for going from nothing to become a TV star, star. Legal disputes, familial betrayal, and a terrible loss that no parent should ever have to go through. Rick, his son, may have created an empire, but the family that built it almost fell apart. The most startling part of Richard Harrison's story was never broadcast on television. So, pay attention. Pay attention. The rise and fall of the Pawn King. Born in the midst of the 20th century, Richard Harrison did not exactly get a lucky break. He started from scratch to achieve success, and his perseverance translated into his family's business. Following in his footsteps, his son Rick Harrison helped make the gold and silver pawn store a household name. However, behind the scenes, things were not as idyllic as they appeared on reality TV. Trouble was developing behind their prosperous company, endangering all they had worked so hard to create. The pawn shop did not become a household name overnight. Rick and Richard had to work hard to get to the top. They encountered obstacles at every stage beginning in the late 1980s. I wouldn't give my worst enemy this. Children consume rice cakes these days. When will that rice cake be ready? Due to antiquated regulations, it was practically impossible to obtain a pawn license in Las Vegas at the time. There was a protracted and annoying wait because they could only open lawfully if the city's population reached a specific threshold. When the opportunity arose, they seized it and fled, gradually transforming the gold and silver pawn store into a major enterprise. He was the tough, no-nonsense businessman who kept the shop operating well for years. When Pawn Stars were broadcast on television, he was popular among fans due to his rough manner, witty remarks, and total indifference to stupidity. However, the family was secretly coping with internal issues that nobody anticipated, even as the show's popularity skyrocketed. Long before he was a star, he had already faced a lot of adversity. He had a difficult upbringing. He spent a significant amount of his early years bedridden due to epilepsy and the death of his sister when he was still a small child. Rather than participating in sports like other children, he immersed himself in literature and grew fixated on history, which eventually served as the basis for his professional life. He left school to sell fake Gucci bags while he was a youngster, earning more money than the majority of adults at the time. But he had to deal with life quickly. He was expecting a child with Kim, his ex-girlfriend. Unfortunately, they miscarried and lost the baby. However, they remained united and subsequently gave birth to a son named Corey. Their marriage failed despite their greatest efforts. Shortly after their divorce, Rick wed Tracy, his second wife. The pawn shop was expanding throughout it all, but so were the duties. Rick had to work around the clock to run the company, and in order to make ends meet, he occasionally had to take on side projects, including repossession of cars. It appeared that all of the effort had paid off when Pawn Stars eventually made it to the reality television scene in the 2000s. Depression. You know, being angry all the time is one of the most obvious symptoms of depression. That is unquestionably you. Dude, you lost your hair. You may have gone through menopause for 10 years or more. The establishment became one of the most well-known pawn shops in the world when the show was a success. However, celebrity also brought with it issues. Due to health concerns, Richard, who had been the company's pillar for decades, began to take a backseat. But the effects of Parkinson's illness were being felt. Furthermore, it was obvious that he would not last forever. For his family, his death was more than just a personal loss. The Pawn Stars fan base was rocked by it. However, new problems arose just as it appeared that the worst had already occurred. When Joanne, his mother, filed a lawsuit against him over the pawn shop, their relationship soured. When she was coming out of a coma, she said Rick had manipulated her into taking over the company. She further claimed that he had stopped providing her with financial support, which had left her in a precarious position. Family-related legal disputes are never pleasant, and this one was public. His once adoring fans now doubted his moral character. In order to stop her own son from selling assets connected to the pawn store, Joanne even succeeded in obtaining a restraining order against him. Regardless of whether Rick was at fault or the accusation was unjustified, the harm was done. The previously resilient family was now shattered. After then, there was another setback, one that no parent should ever experience. Adam, his kid, passed away from an overdose at the beginning of 2024. His loss was profoundly felt, even though he was not as well known as the other members of the family. Rick paid a moving homage, but he was powerless to reverse the anguish of losing his child. Rick attempted to refocus his attention on new endeavors in the midst of all of this. He looked into politics, hoping to get a job in Nevada. Perhaps it was how he found meaning outside of the pawn store, or perhaps a change was all he needed. For those who know where to look, fragments of history continue to appear in unexpected ways even after events appear to be over. Is the value of a revolution. Imagine discovering something that essentially altered the path of history while wandering into a store. Washington and his soldiers were in poor condition in 1777. The soldiers at Valley Forge were freezing, famished, and dropping like flies over the winter. There was no morale. Congress was considering Washington's replacement. Then a Prussian military officer with a thick accent and a talent for discipline, Baron von Steuben, arrives. He starts drilling the motley army, teaching them how to march in formation, hold their bayonets, and fight like a true force. Hands still, lips closed, feet steady. Don't fidget. This was a severe matter. There were also maps in the book that indicated where each item should go in a military camp. The army might have just been sleeping in lumps and crossing their fingers without it. Books from that time period were difficult to preserve, particularly ones that were used by troops who were always on the go. The asking price was $6,500. However, pricing books like this is difficult. Here comes the book specialist, Rebecca. She understood its worth instantly because she had seen it all before. Such a rare discovery. She thought it might get $18,000. That was unexpected. A man with a Winchester rifle from the Battle of Wounded Knee then appears. That firearm isn't your typical one. One of the worst incidents in Native American history is connected to it, more accurately described as a bloodbath. The combat took place in December 1890. An attempt was made by the U.S. Army to disarm a Lakota camp. The tension increased. Suddenly, the 7th Cavalry began firing into the crowd when a gun went off. Hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children had died by the end of it. The final offer was $14,000, which was far less than what the seller had requested. There was also the alleged holy grail of presidential history, which could be extremely valuable if it were real. A titan of American history, Roosevelt oversaw the nation through the Second World War and the Great Depression while covertly combating polio. Combating polio. Even a little video of him needing a wheelchair or having difficulty walking would be invaluable because he was so careful to conceal his impairment. Essentially worthless, the vendor chose to donate the reel instead of accepting the terrible news. A failure for them. A failure for them. However, something new always appears just when it seems like there is nothing more to discover, reminding us that history isn't limited to books. People are still passing it down. The delicate distinction between useless and priceless. If you're wearing this leather jacket, you're flying a plane during World War II. He survived despite the fact that his jet was destroyed by about 200 bullets and 6 gun rounds. The vendor of this garment has bills to pay when it arrives at the pawn store. He would accept $4,000 even if he wants $10,000 for it. The catch? Henry Heidi Cooper, a former member of the notorious Hellhawks, is said to have owned it. If you don't know, these men were legendary during World War II. They were armed to the teeth and were known for their low-flying tank-busting missions, machine guns with a caliber of 850 that could destroy anything they saw. These men spearheaded the assault into Germany, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and hit Normandy. That sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Here's the issue, though. There's a problem. The United States Navy, not the United States Army, is listed on the collar tag. The market has evolved, and the demand for collectors has decreased. The value of what was once a highly sought-after object has decreased. $2,000 is the best offer. The 6th President of the United States was John Quincy Adams. Quite a significant figure, Someone enters with a letter that appears to be signed by him, followed by the $50,000 offer. $115,000 is the seller's counteroffer. It's not taking place. The transaction fails. The transaction fails. Pawn business loses out on holding one of the rarest World War II antiques available when the machine returns home. Does originality really determine historical value? Or is utility important? Are equally as much teenage hustles and pawn ambitions? Rick Harrison was not yet the well-known pawn shop guy on television in the early 1980s. When he was a teenager, he sold fake designer bags, hustled his way into financial success, and had huge dreams. Kim, his first wife, was right there with him. When Rick was just 17, they were married in 1982. Yes, still a child in a hurry to mature. High school, don't think about it. Rick had already left to pursue business ventures. Another item on his list was marriage. He had no idea, though, that one choice would alter everything forever. For a while, Kim and Rick had more than simply the same last name. Together, they had two children. Corey, who was born in April 1983, came first. I should not be giving you people a break, but I am. Thus, visit Carson City. Don't forget to bring Antoine. Just buy it for me if it functions well. You are familiar with him if you have ever watched Pawn Stars. He has been working in the shop, handling a variety of strange situations, and ensuring that no one is taken advantage of. Adam, on the other hand, appeared in 1984. Adam had no interest in the family's pawn shop business in contrast to his older brother. He chose a life away from cameras and signature demands by going into plumbing instead of standing under the bright lights of reality TV. Adam has little interest in the entire pawn realm, Corey previously said in an interview, and everything was good until calamity struck. Adam passed away due to a heroin overdose in January 2024. A tragic turn of events for someone who preferred to remain anonymous. Now, Kim and Rick's marriage was short-lived. They finished by 1985, 3 years and beyond. Why did they split? No one is certain. And Kim hasn't been giving out interviews about it, to be sure. She disappeared from the public eye and led a peaceful life following the divorce. Nobody's aware of her activities, whether she remarried or whether she had other children. Kim decided to avoid all the commotion while Rick went on to become famous for his pawn shop. One thing is evident, though. Kim has maintained communication with her children. In order to demonstrate how close they are, Corey has occasionally shared pictures of them together on social media along with hashtags like #MamaLove. Rick's second wife was Tracy Harrison, who was born sometime in the 1960s. Before divorcing in 2011, they had been together for nearly 25 years, having married in the 1980s. Jake, their son, was born in 2003 during that period. Tracy also had to deal with Rick's two children from his first marriage to Kim, Adam and Corey. Avoid drug use, receive a quality education, and avoid having children outside of marriage. You just made a 95% reduction in your likelihood of living in poverty. 3 items. Despite not being their biological mother, she ultimately played a significant role in raising them both. Let's discuss the son of Rick, Tracy, and Jake. He is currently 21 years old, having been born in 2003. Jake has chosen to remain in the background, in contrast to his half-brother Corey, who has always appeared in the family's television program. However, he had his big break on the show in 2021. He made an appearance in an episode where his father presented him as the shop's newest employee. And what was Jake up to? He passed his father's little test and impressed everyone by identifying a phony Rolex. He did not remain with the company for very long, though. It wasn't so much a job as it was a cameo. In the 1980s, Rick's other son, Adam, was born. Despite not being his mother, Tracy was a significant part of his childhood, particularly after she married Rick. Adam, in contrast to Corey, never made an appearance on the show and opted to avoid the limelight. Before it became a television sensation, he reportedly worked at the pawn store. However, he then changed careers and became a plumber. Adam tragically died in January 2024 at the age of 39 from an unintentional methamphetamine and fentanyl overdose. It was a heartbreaking blow to the family, particularly for Rick, who posted an emotional statement on social media to express his loss. In addition to being a wife and mother, Tracy became involved in the business while she was with Rick. She was popular for her amiable demeanor at the pawn shop where she worked before Jake was born. The transgender community in Las Vegas was among her varied clients, who valued her expertise and respect. She gained a reputation for being patient with patrons. Rick undoubtedly capitalized on the fact that her personal touch contributed to the expansion of the company. Tracy did more than work in the store. While Rick concentrated on growing the company, she also had to handle household duties. It was not an easy life at the pawn shop. Tracy had to handle customers attempting to sell dubious goods, people requesting money, and other tumultuous scenarios that came up on a daily basis. Both frequent clients and staff respected her for her ability to remain composed under pressure, not to mention her involvement with Adam and Corey. Tracy took on a lot of parental duties, ensuring their education and discipline. She had a tight bond with Corey in particular. Even as an adult, he continued to bring his laundry to Tracy so she could wash it, and he relied on her to talk about his issues. Fire. It may sound odd, but it demonstrates his level of confidence in her. Tracy had to adjust to the new family dynamic when Rick began expanding his company, and the show became a television sensation. These items have a pretty great Art Deco appearance, but since few people wear spectacles these days, the raw materials are essentially worth it. Their routine changed and they were given extra tasks as a result of fame. Tracy wanted to stay behind the scenes and make sure everything kept running well, even if Rick and Corey were the shop's public faces. She played a much larger role at the pawn shop than most people realize. Tracy oversaw all daily tasks, including managing employees and maintaining order at home. Tracy made the decision to leave the public glare following the 2011 divorce. Social media is not where she is, refrains from public appearances, and little is known about her subsequent activities. She apparently decided to live a quiet life. Tracy's relationship with the Harrison family was far more profound than what is depicted on television, despite the show's drama and popularity. Despite not being as well known as Rick and Corey, she had a significant impact on the family. She was an important part of everyone's lives, a hardworking wife, and a devoted mother. Tracy's life underwent a significant transformation following the divorce. She moved from being in the thick of things to being totally alone. She hasn't done interviews, talked about her relationship with Rick, or attempted to capitalize on the show's popularity for her own gain. She was never interested in popularity or notoriety, as evidenced by her choice to remain anonymous. All she wanted was a normal life free from the spectacle of television. Rick believed that everything was stable until a new development occurred, a peaceful existence in the midst of celebrity. Last but not least, Deanna Burdett, who was born in 1975, is not exactly well known, but she certainly garnered some notice once she married Rick. Born in 1975, Deanna Burdett isn't exactly well known, but when she married Rick Harrison, she certainly garnered some attention. That is the man who owns the well-known pawn shop on TV where people attempt to sell their grandmother's old items for a quick profit. Deanna, however, wasn't your average Staruk devotee. Before she ever came into contact with reality TV, she had a life before Rick, and to be honest, it was a fairly interesting one. In fact, Deanna had previously gone through the entire marriage process twice. She also had 3 daughters from those marriages. Here's the thing, though. Her children were born to her first spouse, a man named Tamino. Tiana Jo Tamino, one of those girls, made the decision to pursue a career in modeling. You may see her making poses and live her life on the internet. In the meantime, Marissa Tamino, another daughter, made a name for herself in the beauty business by working as a makeup artist in Los Angeles. One flawlessly blended foundation at a time, she is establishing her reputation and growing her own small business. Despite her multiple marriages, Deanna maintained a low profile by concentrating on her work and raising her daughters. Not that she was out seeking attention or celebrity. I'm quite sick all the time, even when she married a man who was constantly on TV. The residence has a single television. Also, keep in mind that it is 1973. There is nothing for a child to watch throughout the day on any of the 3 TV stations. She did not, therefore, suddenly become a media-hungry star wife. She kept her priorities in control and played it cool. I played it cool. Always put your family first. Let's now discuss that momentous wedding. Deanna and Rick made the decision to get married at Laguna Beach, California, in 2013. Their marriage brought together a large number of children, and the location was rather gorgeous. Rick's prior marriages produced 3 sons of his own. As a result, the two of them essentially created their own contemporary blended sitcom family. The blending of 2 distinct families into one created an intriguing dynamic. Here's the worst part, though. Rick and Deanna never had children together. They had no intention of starting again with a newborn or anything similar. Both of them decided that they already had enough children and concentrated only on the task at hand. There was enough busyness in life. Naturally, there would be more attention when you married someone as famous as Rick Harrison. Every now and again, Deanna's girls made headlines. Typically, anytime something about their mother's marriage to Rick was brought up, Deanna was determined to keep them out of the media circus. She exerted every effort to prevent them from being harassed by photographers or drawn into tabloid controversy. She also wasn't out there making money off of her popularity on reality TV. To ensure that her children could just live their lives without making too much noise, she kept everything tightly controlled. In 2020, Deanna and Rick's relationship reaches a breaking point. They decided to call it quits after 7 years. Citing those traditional insurmountable issues, there was a quiet breakup rather than a large, chaotic public meltdown. Translation: they simply didn't click. It occurs frequently. Here's what remained the same, though. Deanna continued to do her usual thing. The dissolution of a well-known marriage did not deter her from concentrating on her girls and her own career. She wasn't going to let a divorce define who she was, and she wasn't wailing about it in the press. She had spent years creating a family-focused life, even before she met Rick. In addition to being a mother, she managed the complexities of her job as a legal secretary. Even when given the opportunity, she never pursued a glamorous profession or tried to achieve Hollywood-level celebrity. Rather, she stayed true to her expertise, maintaining order in both her personal and professional life. The glamour of the entertainment industry and reality TV were not central to her existence. Large risks accompany large rewards. Fortunes vanish with a single misstep, when large wagers result in expensive regrets. The well-known pawn shop's proprietors have been operating for a long time. Though not always, their transactions are successful, they turn a profit, and everything is wonderful most of the time. They occasionally lose a lot of money, whether it's because they are unlucky, they have too much faith in a customer, or they just don't pay close attention to what they are purchasing. And by fortunes, we mean enormous sums of money. These losses are not insignificant. They struggle to recover from these mistakes. Let's review some of the most egregious frauds and mistakes that have cost them money. Rick Harrison has extensive knowledge of collectibles and antiques. However, he made a grave error this time. One of the patrons brought in a book that he said was autographed by the great baseball star Shoeless Joe Jackson. Shoeless Joe's lack of literacy was the issue. This indicates that he was unable to correctly write his own name. Because his signature was so uncommon, there were a lot of fakes on the market. However, Rick paid $13,000 for the book without first consulting an expert, since he was confident and didn't give it any thought. Naturally, they verified it was a fake when he eventually did. A severe financial setback and a lesson that scams may happen to even seasoned experts. In the realm of pawns, diamonds have always been a challenging commodity. Many people have been duped by cubic zirconia, a fake diamond that closely resembles the real one. In the past, the shop's well-known elderly patron believed he had scored a fantastic bargain on some stunning diamonds. However, he was unaware that they were fakes. And tens of thousands of dollars were lost, not just a handful. Following that traumatic experience, they discovered how to distinguish between the true and the phony using specialized testing. However, the harm was already done. Automobiles can be profitable investments or financial catastrophes. When Rick purchased a little, uncommon vintage Austin Healey Sprite, he believed he had discovered a treasure. He was reassured by the proprietor that there were only a few small technological issues. He said it was nothing major. Rick trusted and paid $5,000 for it. However, he discovered that the cost of fixing it would exceed the value of the automobile when he brought it to the technician. A complete loss, in other words. A car is not always a wise investment just because it looks fantastic. Purchasing a uniform purportedly worn by the renowned baseball player Willie Mays was another grave error. After looking at the artwork, Rick's son Corey concluded it was authentic. Everything appeared to be in order, including the design and the stitching, but there was a discrepancy. The customer claimed that the uniform was in perfect shape and that it dated from the year 1955. Joe Diageo, Ty Cobb, and Babe Ruth. Additionally, for sports collectors, uniforms are essentially the ultimate goal. A worn-out Willie Mays uniform, that's a lot of money. Mays was notorious for getting messy throughout every game and sliding around the field. Why, then, did this uniform appear to have been freshly laundered? Additionally, the purchaser lacked a certificate of authenticity, which is a need for practically all sports collectibles in order to verify their legitimacy. Nevertheless, Corey paid $31,000 for it. They found out it wasn't genuine when they brought in an expert. That money was gone. That money was gone. Purchasing stolen products is one of the worst things that can happen to a pawn business. The law is obvious even if they don't do it intentionally. You could face severe consequences if you purchase something that has been stolen. That's precisely what happened when they found an old coin called a silver shekel. According to legend, it was one of the coins used to betray Jesus Christ and was an extremely rare item. It sounds like a fantastic discovery, doesn't it? Or doesn't it? No, since a sheriff showed up at the store immediately after the purchase to tell them that the coin had been stolen before it was sold. They misplaced the coin and were unable to get their money back, despite not being jailed. Rick has a deep affection for vintage guitars. Rick fell in love with the Fender Stratocaster from the year 1961, the moment a musician named Vic brought it in. He paid $55,000 for it without giving it any thought. He believed he could sell it for $90,000 and earn handsomely. However, the issue was that nobody was interested in purchasing it. Not for less than $90,000. He ultimately had to sell it at auction and only received $20,000. A terrible lesson and a huge loss. Something is not necessarily a wise investment just because you find it appealing. Chumley is the one employee in the store that consistently gets into problems. There was one buyer who brought in a Gibson mandolin and said it was real. In his excitement, Chumley recalled that Rick had desired a mandolin similar to that and believed he was getting a wonderful deal. Chumley paid $1,500 for the mandolin, despite Rick's warning that he should never spend more than $1,000 on anything without first talking to him. They discovered it wasn't even worth half of that when they brought in an expert. A quintessential Chumley error, demonstrating once more his poor decision-making skills. Chumley also made a rash purchase, spending $500 on a collection of comic books without first consulting an expert. He believed he was getting a terrific deal, but the comics were only worth $200 when they brought in an evaluator. Another setback, another error, and yet another Rick reprimand. Do you believe that his errors are real or only a part of the performance? Tell us in the comments section. For more, subscribe and like this post.